this whole idea of like a colorblind society doesn't exist. And I don't think it's a healthy thing anyway. It's how do we acknowledge our differences and thrive together and don't, go to a point where if I gain, then you lose.
Hey, what's up, y'all? Welcome to Finding a Way, the podcast for positive change. I'm here with none other than Chef Nigel Jones. Nigel, thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you, appreciate you.
So, for those who don't know, if you know Kingston 11, if you know Calabash, if you know good food in Oakland, you should know this guy. So, without further ado, once again, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you for being here. How you doing today?
I'm good. Today is Saturday, and we're in the first part of February, which is, Black History Month.
Shout out to the people.
And and it feels good as we, start turning the corner, getting out of the winter, and then, you're looking to spring, and then also know it's our month,
Right,
but
put a little pep in your step.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I'm feeling good. Thank you for having me on this podcast. It's a pleasure to support you, our community, and to show up.
I appreciate you. Once again, thank you for making time.
Yes.
I say making time because I know today has already been quite a day for you.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit about some of the work you've been doing.
Yeah. So, every month, the U.S. Reserve Navy have a training exercise where they go to the Alameda base. And the reserves are people who used to be in the actual Army or in this case, the Navy. And, they're no longer serving full time, but wherever they are in terms of where they live around the country, they come in and they have exercise. Just try to be sharp and things like that. And I've had the pleasure about a year and a half ago to cater one of the exercise lunch. And because the way we cook and the flavors, these guys were like, whoa.
And said, come back.
Come back. So I've had the pleasure since then, almost every other month, because they have other chefs in rotation to cook for them. So today is 120 folks that are there, men and women who are doing exercises. And then tomorrow it'll be the same. So it's, like I said, it's a pleasure for me to do that, to share my gifts in terms of nourishment, but also the flavors of, where we come from, right?
Yeah.
And and tomorrow is another busy day. I have an event here at a restaurant called Beats and Bonding.
Beats and Bonding. And what that is about, a friend of mine, from the Congo, his parents own Malanga Arts Center here in Oakland, and he's a drummer. Okay.
And he also is a dancer, a musician, and just a top-notch performer. So we're having this event that we're honoring and supporting fathers throughout Oakland, specifically, Black and brown, but it's open to everyone. And what we're going to be doing is being in community with each other, speaking with the drums and teaching each other how to, connect that way. We'll have food, we'll have conversations, and a number of people, artists, and folks that are well known in our community, like Fantastic Negrito, who's a Grammy winner, and folks like that will be in the house. And so I'm excited about us being in concert because, as you know, Black and brown fathers, even when we show up, we don't get recognition and we're not seen.
Yeah.
And so therefore, there's a lot of us in our community who are supporting and lifting up, doing all kinds of things that are positive. And we want to make sure that we see each other, recognize each other, irregardless if anybody else acknowledges us.
Right.
We want to acknowledge each other. And that's what this is about.
I love that.
Thank you.
That's awesome. So is this the first one you guys are going to do?
The first one?
Recurring thing?
Yeah, I think there is going to be an opportunity for a series, not necessarily here in this space.
Right.
We may move it around because I'm sure once it gets going,
people love that.
People are going to be like, oh, how do I get involved? So we may need to go to a bigger venue as we roll, out with different, chances. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's really cool, man. So are you partnering with people? I know you mentioned there's a lot of community members going to be out, but was there somebody that came to you with this idea? Or
it's Kwazi Malanga. And I think he's done this before.
Okay.
And as I mentioned before, it's a ritual, an African ritual in terms of how you, you create community.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of us who are no longer in Africa and brought to different places, like myself, being born in Jamaica, but as you know, Jamaica is not indigenous to us Africans.
So must not away.
Exactly. So it's important for us to find a different route, getting back in terms of connectivity to our ancestors and our culture.
100%.
And this is one of those opportunities. So
that's really cool.
When he mentioned that he wanted to do this, and I'm like, yo, let's do it at my space and let's make it happen. So I'm excited about it.
Right on.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm gonna have to come.
Yeah, definitely. You should come through, man.
Yeah.
All of you guys, come on through. It's free. We're going to have food. And like I said, probably 60, 70 folks are going to be here.
Yeah.
Kids are welcome as well. We'll have games and things like that where the kids can hang out and spend time with each other. Yeah, we want to make it a fun. It's before the Super Bowl.
Okay.
So the Super Bowl starts at 3:30.
Okay.
We'll be here from 11 until 2:30. Awesome. Then people can go back and watch the football or whatever it was. Yeah, exactly. Exactly.
That's cool. Yeah. Okay. So I know just from my brief research and having spoken to you a little bit, I default to calling you Chef Nigel.
Yeah.
But it's like, I feel like there's a little bit more to you. How would you describe the work that you do?
Yeah. So, in this industry, based on what you do, that becomes your title. But I'm also an entrepreneur first and foremost.
Right.
So I own the business. I'm also the chef. And so my background is more in the fashion industry. I used to work for Levi Strauss for 11 years. I was the head of the supply chain there for the Dockers and Levi's brand.
Right on.
So what that looks like when you talk about supply chain is basically working with the designers, the merchandisers each season, and all the products, clothing, pants, shorts, t-shirts, whatever we design. It would be my department responsibility to get it produced. A lot of the places we produced it were in Asia, China, Hong Kong, the Philippines, Sri Lanka, including even South America. And so when I decided at some point that I wanted to see more of my culture reflected back at me here in the Bay Area, that's when I decided I wanted to make the jump from corporate America into the restaurant industry, because I wanted to see my culture back here. There was no Jamaican restaurant at that scale that I wanted to see it. And so I took a few French cooking camps.
Okay.
But I'm a self-taught chef. I'm bringing my culture, my grandmother, and the people who, all the flavors that we grew up with, and the spices, and that's what I bring. So even if I'm sitting in a class and they're talking about culinary, cuisine and flavors and even techniques of knife skills and recipes or whatever, your brain automatically go back into your own culture. And that's what I did. And in preparation to open in Kingston 11 the first time in 2013. And from there, now I have this new restaurant, Calabash. And it's a different space, but it's the same mission. Building community and bringing people together through nourishment and entertainment and, just a space where we can gather.
Right on.
And we're losing more and more spaces that, when we show up, people feel uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to make this place beautiful, relaxing, casual, but when you walk in, it's your spot.
Yeah.
As a person of African descent, it's your place.
No, I can definitely say you achieved. Right. This is a beautiful, beautiful space.
Thank you. Yeah.
If you haven't been, I highly recommend, just off the aesthetics alone. If the food is half as good as the aesthetics, I know it's twice as good. You definitely want to come to this place. So you said a couple of things.
Yeah.
I have a couple of questions. You said French culinary school. Did you go to France or was it?
No, it's here. There's a lot of schools here in culinary. There are classes you can take. There are courses you can go for 2 or 3 or 4 years. Cordon Bleu. There's a lot of different places. But I knew I wanted to focus on what I already know, but I wanted some technical skills and foundation. Especially including even just operating a business. A lot of people know how to cook, but owning and operating a restaurant
with employees and paying taxes and all the permits. There's a lot to it.
That's a whole nother.
So and so, you know, it's not just cooking. It's all kinds of things. And, you know, a lot of times we open businesses, especially Black-owned businesses, and we just have enough resources to open and not enough to sustain ourselves when you have to go through the trials and tribulation that all business go through. And if you don't have the capital, it's hard for us to sustain ourselves and stay open. So those are the things that you need to understand when anybody get into any business in terms of how you prepare yourself.
Definitely. What are some things that you feel like you've learned along the way, or kind of, you know, resources that you discovered that help you through that entrepreneurial process?
Yeah. Well, as I mentioned, you know, working for Levi Strauss for 11 years, you know, and working cross-functionally with different departments, and even culturally being in different countries and producing products and shipping it back to the United States, gave me a very, you know, high degree of confidence in terms of working in a complex environment to take on the restaurant industry. You know, when I first started, people were like, oh, you never opened a restaurant, don't do it, especially the Black person, you know, and, you know, so I had confidence on certain aspect of it, especially, you know, not only in the cooking, but as I mentioned to you before, supply chain. So you have to buy products.
I know there's shelf lives and stuff.
Exactly. All these things, I knew I can operate in a multi-dimensional environment, and it pays big dividends for me having that skills working from, you know, in a corporate environment, and then now being an entrepreneur. And also being a self-starter. You know, you got to get up every day and do it over and over and over again. And even days you don't want to do it, even days when people call in sick, you got to show up if you own the place. You know? So
you definitely got to love it.
You got to, exactly.
So what was the thing that made you feel like a pivot was necessary? Because you said you wanted to, you know, you come from this fashion space, more corporate, but still, you know, there is, some people would say, an avenue for, or there could have been someone would say, oh, I do fashion. Let me try and influence and show my culture through fashion.
Yes.
What made you feel like I wanted to do what some would consider a hard pivot?
Well, again, I had a passion for food. And as I traveled with Levi's in different places, I was always curious and attracted to watch how people socialize around food, because for me the big thing is community. You know, and so I always lean back into that very heavily. You know, how do I build community, and how do you build community around food and nourishment, and you know, you can sit down and have a conversation around, you know, some good delicious food, a glass of wine or even a glass of water. And so one of the things I enjoyed when I traveled, like for instance, being in Hong Kong, and you go to a restaurant and you see multi-generations of Chinese people sitting in a restaurant, grandmother, you know, and then the, you know, husband and wife with their parents, and then the kids, and then cousins, and it could be like 10, 20 people around one table, and then all the different dishes that people are just sharing. But one of the things about that, you know, if you look at it on the surface, you say, oh, it's a bunch of people there eating some really good, tasty food, lots of variety. But then you peel it back a little bit and understand the culture of the country, Hong Kong. Hong Kong is a very tight, you know, space country, whereas the apartment buildings, the rooms are very small. They're not like America, where you have these big bedrooms, big living rooms.
It's kind of like a vertical.
Exactly. So when people gather in big groups, they go outside. Instead of coming to people's house, they go to the restaurant.
You ain't coming to my living room.
Exactly. Not enough space. But community, family is very, very important in that culture. And where I'm from, in Jamaica, the same thing. A lot of African country, culture, groups, and multi-generation and multi-neighborhood, you know, we're used to that. And that's what I want to bring into Kingston 11 and now into Calabash.
Wow. That's really interesting. Like when you laid that out, that makes 100% sense, because, you know, I dabble a little bit in the fashion space. I like to think myself a fashion connoisseur. But it's definitely one of those things that's more of a, at least from my perspective, individualistic. You know, you kind of trying to show your own individualism as opposed to thinking more collectively or community oriented. So it's like you could, for example, have an influence culturally in that space, but it's going to read totally differently than, you know, let's sit around a table together. That's an interesting.
But I love fashion. I love to dress. I I understand it. Yeah, I got style. I love to, you know, see how people dress and but that's all part of, you know, this whole industry. You know, when people come into the space and they get dressed up and looking beautiful and sexy and or casual, you know, it's a different thing in the space and that's how the community is that you come as you are, you know, and
still feel at home.
Exactly.
Another thing you said, it's funny you mentioned Hong Kong. I literally just came from like lunch with my family at Becky's up in Rockridge. And they have the little, the Lazy Susans in the middle. I always loved, like just from Chinese restaurants as a kid. But it just feels like, you know, it's designed specifically for sharing.
Exactly.
And I think that's, you know, a little underrated piece of the experience.
It's a big thing. Sharing and building, you know, community and sharing of ideas, sharing of culture. And we need that more in the United States.
Definitely.
And that's one of the things that, you know, as Black and brown people, we have a lot. We've always provided a lot into this country, but even now, more so now, where, you know, there's a lot of stress and people are trying to figure out different ways of how they cope. If we lean into our ancestors and lean into who we are, I think, you know, we have a better opportunity not only to survive and you know and thrive, but do it with joy. So
well, you just set it up perfectly for kind of how I wanted to take this in the next phase of our conversation. You talked a bit about, you know, always having an affinity for cooking. I did a little reading up, and you always mentioned your grandmother. So just kind of take us back to those early days. Like, if you could, you know, mark a couple of maybe landmark moments or, you know, decisions or experiences that kind of you feel like guide you along your path. Let's take it back a little bit further.
Well, you know, I was born in Kingston, Jamaica to two teenage parents. You know, my mom was 15 years old. My father was 15, 16, 17, something like that. And obviously they're not planning on having a child. So, you know, that within itself, me being here is a miracle, right? My mom said, first time she ever had sex, she got pregnant. Don't know if that's true, but here I am. And so my mother left Jamaica. Actually, my father left Jamaica before I was actually born and migrated to England. My mother migrated to the United States probably about, you know, I was like 2 or 3 years old. So I grew up with my grandparents. Neither one of my parents were on the island anymore. So, you know, unintentionally abandonment, but not how I felt. I was brought up by my grandparents with lots of love and support. My mom would come from the United States and visit. My father never came back. Never met my father until I moved to the United States and graduated from high school in the Bronx, New York. And he left from England and came and visit. And that's the first time I ever met him. I was like 17, 18 years old. But where I grew up in Jamaica, my grandfather worked for the Jamaica Railroad Station for 31 years. The guy next door to us worked for this company called D&G, Denny's and Getty's. These are the people that make, or the company that make Red Stripe beer. And the guy next door to that makes, you know, works at the bakery that makes patties and so on and so forth. So what I'm describing is a community of working class people. We all own our own home. There's a bunch of kids the same age grown up. And I can go 5 or 6, 7, 8 blocks and people will still know my grandparents. And so, you know, if I did anything that was not, exactly. By the time I get back home, my grandmother knows it, you know, waiting for me with a strap, you know. So, you know, when I think and talk about community and what I'm building in this restaurant, it's not a marketing handle or some kind of catchy phrase. I know exactly what it is. And so as I lift up Kingston 11 and now Calabash, you know, the vibe is imprinted in my not only my mind and my soul, but, you know, in every little fiber of my body. It's like recreating that childhood village that I grew up in, and where everybody was just doing them and show up, and that's, to me, I think that's the gift of Oakland. And I want to make sure the city lives up to its potential, so to speak. So only thing I can do is my share, and I try to do that in many, many ways, not just the food and the space, but I expand myself outside the boundaries of my restaurant to build community, including politically, socially, and in different ways that just bring people together.
So I want you to kind of speak a little bit more about that, because I'm not sure everybody knows all that you're involved in the community.
So, again, just, in terms of, as a Black-owned business person, we've been dealing with this economy since day one, where our labor was for free. And as people say, make America great again, for some people, that is taking you back to those days. When our labor wasn't, paid for, and it didn't belong to us. So as we move forward, and we've, have a lot of achievement, through our ancestors and the fathers, grandparents, all these things to where we are today. There's still a struggle. And we're not going to sit around and say we don't have what we need to succeed, but we have to be very creative. In this industry, the restaurant industry, you can't go to a bank if you're opening a new restaurant and say, give me a loan. They don't give you loans if you're Black, white, or green. You don't get loans like that. So you have to have community to give you or lend you money. A lot of us Black folks, we don't have friends that can say, yo, I'm here, can I borrow $200,000 from you? No, it doesn't happen. So we have to be very creative of how that, we build businesses. Yes, we can borrow $5,000, $10,000, $6,000, $7,000 here and there. But when we do open a business, it's basically, that's it. We don't have any reserve to set us up for...
There's no Series B.
Exactly. So therefore, when I opened Calabash, it was right after the pandemic. And so you think about the economy, they're telling you in America, stay at home, don't go out. And so therefore, not only that you spend all your money building out a restaurant, now you don't even have your customer base because people are not showing up. They don't show up at work because now we're in a situation where people are now working from home more than they used to. And then we moved from 2019, 2021, into 23, where you have lots of crime going on in the city. People are breaking into people's cars and all this other stuff. And when that happens, it further scares people. So when that happens, then you don't get people coming out shopping and spending money in your community. And again, as Black-owned businesses, if you go 1 or 2 months where you can't make ends meet, you can be out of business very quickly. And so I've been trying to figure out how do we, deal with the structure of how business is done in Oakland, and to try to give us, our community, a chance to, lift ourselves up. So the only way we can do that is to, figure out how do we build a wider network. So we created an organization where we have more than 400 or 500 small businesses across Oakland, East Oakland, West Oakland, Uptown, Downtown, that we are together. And so we've been lobbying out of this restaurant here, meetings, different times of the year, months, bringing all the elected officials, including the, city council members, all the different districts. And we've had success in terms of, getting people like Caltrans next door here. Since the pandemic, they had 1,700 people in this building at 23rd and Grand Avenue. Nobody was coming back. Because, union workers, especially for the government, you give people something, it's hard to take it back. And I understand, especially, people have, effective ways of working from home. And then also having to commute, park, and it's a lot of expense. Nobody's rushing to come back home. But the economy is structured in a certain way that I'm paying $10,000 for rent with the expectation that people are going to be back in the space, and they're not. So, until the politicians or somebody deal with that imbalance, it leaves the businesses to either fail, shut down, or find some way to deal with that. And that's what I've been doing. So now we've lobbied Caltrans through different sources, again, community building. So now they're part of my community, the director there.
And she's agreed to have workers come back into that building on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, mandatory. And then the balance of the week, they can come back by department as people feel like. So that's going to benefit my business here to have 1,700 people available to come down, walk around uptown Oakland in different spaces and spend their money at lunchtime on 2 days a week. Now, Calabash is not the only one that's going to benefit. And in fact, most of the people on Grand Avenue, which include Farley's and all these other restaurants, are going to benefit. So that's how we as brown people show up, in that we don't looking to solve problems for ourselves only. We're looking at the whole structure and the community, and we're good with other people benefiting from that. Okay. And that's it.
Right on. So you gave us a little bit of another perspective, I guess, on the remote work situation.
Yes.
You might get us canceled, man. People don't want to go back in that office. But it's actually, I think, something that you don't really think about is how you're impacting your community and the ecosystem. That's definitely a different perspective. I appreciate that.
Yeah, well, the world has changed since the pandemic. And we have to figure out where we're going and how it's changed. How the change is going to impact everything, and then how do you right size that? Because some people are staying at home, but the economy wasn't built for that. So how do you, shake that out? And there's going to be more shakeout because there's a lot of buildings around here in uptown Oakland where workers are not coming back, and the people who own those companies, they're not going to re-sign the lease once those leases are up. So therefore, you can have a bunch of vacant buildings here in Oakland, all these high-rise. So, it's got to be dealt with one way or another. And hopefully, it's being dealt with in a strategic way versus that, one day, the economy, which we already have right now, a big deficit in Oakland. If somebody is not paying attention to these things, we can have more fallout. And those are the kind of things, as a Black-owned community person, I'm trying to make sure we have an opportunity to discuss this. For instance, next Monday at noon here at Calabash, we're looking at, how do we positively impact the replacement from the previous mayor. So the previous mayor was recalled back in November 2nd with the election. And now the re-election or the election of a new mayor is going to be mid-April. So probably the 15th around there. So the two top candidates, Barbara Lee, representative, in the Congress, is now going to be running. And she's going to be very impactful as a candidate. And if she wins as a leader of our city. Then there's also Lauren Taylor, who was a second runner-up to the last mayor. Is very solid, has a lot of good policies, and would be a good choice as well. And so, those two candidates are the ones that we're going to be talking to. When I say we are putting together a cross section of businesses and community folks from each district, East Oakland, West Oakland, and uptown.
Is this related to that network, or is that a different group?
Yeah, well, it's part of it. It's all of these things. So what we're trying to do is bring everybody together, again, community, but this time it's around how do we impact the health, the wealth of the city, because we are a big part of it, and most of the times, things happen to us, shit happens, and then we deal with it. So we're trying not to have that scenario here. We want to be in the room with the people who are who have already raised their hand, so they want to lead the city, which is fine. So,
that's awesome. So you're creating a space where community members can actually engage with these candidates directly.
Yes, and it's necessary. It's inappropriate for Oakland to done the hard work to recall a mayor, which has never happened, and then to stand down and let the new person comes in without having
some say in it.
No, it's not gonna happen.
That's a wonderful and creative use of space to because that's something I think a lot about is that maybe it's part of me just getting older and finding myself in these spaces more, but I would say on average the average Bay Area citizen doesn't seem particularly civically engaged, even though we're obviously directly impacted by all of these policies and decisions. So it's like, it's been, I guess, refreshing for me to find myself in spaces where it's like people are curating these conversations, you know, creating those dialogues, because I think the more people that get involved in actually, you know, decisions that shape what the city looks like, the more people are going to be happy and, like you said, healthier environments and all of that. Before we move forward, I wanted to kind of go back one more time because, you know, we talk about that journey, your youth in Kingston and then moving to America. Just talk a little bit about that transition. Like, what are some things, because, you know, you mentioned the community and how that kind of shaped your worldview early on. What are some things, maybe like challenges that you maybe had to deal with when you were making transitions from that culture to American culture?
Yeah. Well, you know, again, assimilation, right? I came here when I was 15, 16 years old, coming from a whole different educational system. Jamaica, as being a colony of England, have a different, you know, system where, let's see, even the way we dress, we had to wear a uniform and also, you know, punishment. You know, if you didn't do your homework and if you taught back to a teacher, you'll get floggings or beaten in Jamaica.
The ruler, huh?
Oh, yeah. It's just like going to Catholic school, right? Here, I guess, here. But that's how all the schools are in Jamaica. And then coming here and then, you know, being in the classroom in the Bronx, New York. Multicultural, there are Asian folks, there are people, Puerto Ricans, there are, you know, people from the Caribbean, there are, you know, Jews, Italians, all at the school. It's got Christopher Columbus High School in the Bronx, which is close to the Bronx Zoo. And then also, as I open my mouth to speak, people look at me like, you're not from around here. So you have a Jamaican accent, and at 15, 16 years old, you don't want to sound different. You want to fit in. And, you know, people would call me banana boat and, you know, all these things. And, you know, so you become very self-conscious. And so as you can hear the way I speak right now, you know, I work hard to lose my Jamaican accent as hard as I could at that age, because I didn't want to be different. I didn't want people to know that I'm not from the United States. But as you lose your language, you're also losing your culture. And so, you know, it wasn't until I graduated from high school and in college and went back to Jamaica for, you know, to visit my family, and realized that, you know, I started to, you know, with my language and everything else, create a separation between me and them. And that's where I decided, you know, that I acknowledged that wasn't a good thing. And yeah, you know, that's one of the biggest things that stood out for me is, you know, and it's still an issue right now in terms of how we assimilate in this country, especially if you are now sort of called an immigrant, foreigner. You know, it's necessary somewhat to assimilate and understand the language here and understand how people do things here, but you should also bring you and your culture. That's what make America great,
right?
I think, you know,
diversity,
yeah,
you know, the melting pot, right?
Yeah, you don't have to melt. But you just show up, you know,
bring
and
your flavor.
Yeah, bring you are, and that's what we do at Calabash in Kingston. You know, the way I cook, I don't tame anything down. I bring our flavors, I bring everything, because I think, you know, we're richer when we share ourselves with each other.
Yeah. 100%. That's beautiful. That's like a, you know, almost full circle in a way where you say you kind of, you know, from your youth being, you know, heavily impacted by how vibrant and local and, you know, I guess familiar your community was at a young age, to almost feeling maybe ostracized at a, you know, in the teenage years, to coming around to embracing and then advocating for your culture. That's beautiful. Yeah. So switch gears a little bit. Happy to learn more about you, definitely, and provide a little context for the person, not just the chef. But you talk a lot about, you know, the impact that you're trying to drive, you know, through the network and through the cooking and the restaurant. What is something that you feel like you would like us to figure out? What's something you hope we could find a way to do in your lifetime?
I guess I can answer that question anyway, right? In terms of what is it that I would like for us? I mean, people of color, Black people, the city of Oakland,
as a society, like, you know, as people. Or let me rephrase that, I guess, because what would you say is your vision of a brighter future?
I mean, you know, America is, since I live here, I'm framing it, you know, that way in terms of what life is here. It's a good country. And the fact that there's tension and strife is a good thing, because that means we're not accepting things that are not working. And tension and stress comes when people are pushing back.
People care.
Yeah. And as we push back, there's more pushback, right? And then that's how you make progress. And so we're in another juncture right now where there's a pushback from the right. As you look 8 years ago with Obama being president, then you have, you know, Trump coming in and Biden, and now Trump again. And this time with, you know, vengeance and, you know, animosity. So the Achilles heel of this country is always around race. So what I would like is, you know, in terms of achievement, which we have to work there, you know, this whole idea of like a colorblind society doesn't exist. And I don't think it's a healthy thing anyway. It's how do we acknowledge our differences and thrive together, and don't, you know, go to a point where if I gain, then you lose, you know, that sense of scarcity, right? So, you know, I have 2 daughters. And so, you know, again, there's the gender issues as well, you know, women thriving and being able to be the best they can, and they're Black. Same thing, you know, around their culture and their you know, their gender, right? That's what I want for everybody else. So what I would love to see is how do we, you know, embrace our gifts across the board, and not have some young white kid feel that if my daughter as a Black young woman succeed, that it's at their expense and they need to fight and push back against that. There's enough for everybody. But it's a matter of perspective and mindset. Exactly. So, and nobody, you know, enough who have power ever give it up willingly. So, you know, we're not saying let's go to war to get it, but, you know, there is a soft war that's cultural intelligence, and sometimes it's just around eating food and sitting around and being nourished and playing games and different ways of how you transcend some of these you know, obstacles that, you know, brute force won't do it. You know, our numbers are not enough that we're going to go to war here in this country.
You got to be creative.
And we're good at that. You know, so
That's wonderfully said. Is that kind of what you would say is your approach in this soft war of sorts, like the space making? I read something the other day. I wish I could remember the name of the organization, but because you mentioned those abandoned buildings that are kind of becoming more prevalent ever since the pandemic. And this organization, they are, I guess, they call themselves space makers, but they, you know, they do different events, exhibits and stuff like that, pop-ups even, at some of these abandoned spaces across the country. And I just think that that's a really, I guess, creative approach to something that can be viewed as, you know, an issue, if it's another way to stimulate the economy, to get people to think creatively about space and coming together. Whether it's, you know, art exhibits, museums, or spaces like this where you can just, you know, host events. I think that is going to be one of our, you know, for sake of the metaphor, most powerful weapons to continue to be creative about how we do use the resources and spaces that are available to us.
I agree. And in every situation, you know, where there are change, there are opportunities, right? And, you know, and the more different people have a chance to engage in the thinking in terms of what and how things could be done differently, then the richer those solutions could be. Because the people who are in those space originally, they don't have any incentive to change anything. Like, for instance, all the landlords with these abandoned spaces, what they're doing is just sitting there
with those buildings that they already paid their mortgage, and they are comfortable not renting it to you or me if you can't afford it, or giving it for an artist. They're comfortable just leaving it as it is, and then hopefully someday the economy turns around and they can get top dollar for their money.
Right.
You know, that's your choice. But is that the best use of that building for a city where there's blight and there is, you know, homelessness? There's also, you know, lots of things that is not healthy for the city.
Probably not, right?
It's not.
Yeah.
And so therefore, when we have young people and different people come up with ideas and engage those established people and say, hey, you know, what about X, Y, and Z? And if they're open, that's how we make these progress, right?
Yeah.
So, it's important for us to, you know, bring different people to the space in terms of just conversation.
100%.
Yeah.
My question becomes, because I definitely agree with that approach.
Yeah.
But in some of the work I've been doing, what feels almost inevitable, at least at the outset, is when you are bringing together these new ideas and perspectives, especially when it's people who maybe haven't had a seat at the table, so they feel like, you know, now's my chance, I gotta vocalize my opinion.
Yes.
How do you deal with the discourse and the conflict to make sure we're actually still moving forward? Because I feel like a lot of times we all get stuck at, all right, now we're here at the table, what are we gonna eat, right? Like everybody kind of gets in their own, you know, their own bubble, their own perspective, their own silo. And the collaboration piece is difficult sometimes.
Yeah, well, collaboration is hard. It's hard work.
Yeah.
You know, nothing is easy. And, you know, and it's getting harder with technology, you know, and social media, because everybody now has their own facts, their own way of seeing the world.
Their own echo chamber.
Yeah, exactly. The echo chamber, they don't need to, you know, open themselves up and look at somebody else and hear other people, right? So, you know, it's a challenge, but that doesn't mean that we can't bridge those gaps, right? And we have to. And there are skills. There are a lot of people like yourself and other people who are there sitting down and having conversations and invite people to build different skills, challenge themselves. And that's how we're going to do it. You know, it's not for me to just tell you you're wrong and then you tell me I'm wrong and then we yell at each other. You know, hopefully we can have a dialogue and go back and forth. And if that doesn't work, step away, come back another day and then figure it out. And that's sometimes it just takes a little bit longer to get there.
True, that's very true. What are some things, you kind of alluded to, you know, the political climate, and we're sort of in a backlash period, as some people might say. Just everybody I see actually is I've seen this tweet go around saying that it's intentional, the feeling of chaos right now, where it's like, you know, there's been headline after headline, January, even till, you know, right now, where it's just like, it almost desensitizes you. What are some things that you do to keep yourself grounded and focused on the work when it can be, you know, daunting or overwhelming?
Yeah. Well, I think all of us have an opportunity and an obligation to take care of our own home and our own community, our own, you know, family, our own friends and stuff like that. So what does that mean? That means you act locally. You know, you can see what's happening nationally and internationally, meaning what's happening in the White House and in Washington. But for me right now, what's happening in Oakland is more important. And the more you take small bites and, you know, and digest it and move on to another, piece, is like somebody said, how do you eat an elephant? Is like one bite at a time, right? Same thing. You know, so a lot of times, as you mentioned, there's all these distraction and chaos and we get all flustered. You know, step back, and that's what I'm committed to doing. You know, like I mentioned, you know, with having these political forum here in this room, I'm trying to impact my city by making sure that whoever is going to become mayor knows and see us and understand where the partnership should be to grow the city. That's important, and that's going to, you know, impact hundreds and hundreds of businesses and people and communities, and I feel really good about that. So therefore, and it's not just me, it's all of us doing those things. It just grows, and you feel a bit more like, oh,
I'm not helpless.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and that's basically my approach, is to act locally as much as you can. What's happening in your building? What's happening in your block? What's happening in your kid's school? And et cetera, et cetera. Yeah.
Right on. Man. So you laid it out perfectly, honestly, because I always like to kind of drill down on that question, but you gave, I think, actual, tangible, actionable steps, you know,
Sure.
whether it's, you know, going to a PTA meeting or joining Neighborhood Watch,
Yeah.
just like, you know, becoming more locally
Yes.
involved.
Yeah.
And that's going to, you know, make all the difference.
It makes a huge amount of difference.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
If you hypothetically were, let's say, mayor, president, or you know, just world leader,
Yeah.
and you can make an executive order to drive some positive change, what would you implement into our communities?
Positive change. You know, I just feel like right now it's resources, right? You know, there's a lot of things that people can do. You know, we live in a capitalistic society where everybody's got to get up and they got to go to work or go to school. You got to feel like you're doing something. And even when you're doing things from a creative perspective, you got this thing in your brain telling you that, you know, challenge you whether or not you're, you know, if it's worthwhile, because, you know,
If it don't make dollars, it don't make sense.
exactly that kind of a thing. Like, and so, yeah, we need to just unleash people's own creativity. And I'm not sure how to do that, you know, but that would be something that I would like to see happen as much as possible. And it's different from different people in different countries and different cities, even in this country, in community, to get people in a space where they can feel productive, because we all, you know, don't march to the same beat of the drum.
Yeah.
And so how do you, or somebody else that have a different vibe and rhythm, you know, given the space to just thrive and contribute? Because I think that's how things grow, and some amazing things can happen that given that space that wouldn't have happened.
Yeah, that's like the great social experiment, though,
Yeah.
right? Like ever since we started trying to do like settlements and cities, and whatnot, it's like, okay, how do we get these people to, you know, stop beating on each other?
Yeah, even just people working from home, you know, that's something that work has been asking for a long time. And I mean, executive companies wouldn't allow it, not until the pandemic. And they were like, oh shit, this shit does work.
Conflicting interests or desires, or
but it worked, and they're like, oh, people can be productive from being at home,
right?
So, you know, so hopefully it doesn't, you know, have to take another big, you know, tragedy before people have more gains in terms of, you know, allowing folks to just do that.
Yeah, but to that point, though, I think it's like, you know, the pandemic kind of allowed space to think and act differently and creatively. So it's like, without that sort of catalyst of a pandemic, how do we find ways to encourage that creativity and experimentation, right? Because you never know, you know, how remote working works if you don't actually get the chance to try.
Exactly. Yeah. So
that's real.
Cool.
A bit of a, maybe not a random one, but I need to know.
I
feel like every chef has a favorite dish.
For me, I don't have a favorite dish as much as a favorite type foods. I like, you know, in terms of cooking, I like to cook meats.
You like to cook meats?
Yeah, and different meats. I don't eat pork. You know, as far as favorite dishes, chicken. I love cooking chicken all different ways. But I love to experiment with meats, and all meats are different. The different cuts, they take some of them you can cook very quickly. And some of them takes a long time. You have to cook it nice and slow. My thing in terms of meats, it needs to be tender and juicy. So that's my end state. So every meat I approach, I have to figure out what is this meat required to get it there. And then the other thing too is around spices and flavor. In Jamaica, the way we cook, when people talk about spiciness here, they mean it's hot. Pepper. In Jamaica, when we talk about spice, it's flavor. Ginger, pimento, nutmeg, anything that, you know, give it flavor in terms of the, you know, the structure of the product is what we're about in Jamaica.
Yeah.
And so, for me to cook any meat, it's just that, I want to take my time and get it to the point when you're eating it, it's falling off the bone, it's juicy, it's not dry,
Right.
and things like that.
Yeah.
And so it's always a challenge for me when I look at different meats. It could be like a steak, it could be a something like a ribeye where it only takes a few minutes versus like a short rib or a roast that takes 2 or 3 hours, and then you have to slow it down. But the end state is nice and juicy. Yeah,
juicy. Yeah. Okay. So maybe not necessarily a favorite dish, but you like to emphasize or learn more about how to make the optimal cut
it's
of
the
meat.
style. Yeah, exactly. For me, it's about I want whoever is sit down with anything that I eat to say, wow, this was delicious.
Yeah.
And that they recognize that care was in it. So
Right.
for me, finesse versus force and speed is more important.
Okay. So you got the soon come. You got
Man. Soon come. Take your time, man.
Take it easy.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there any dish that you feel like kind of takes you back home, like whether on the Calabash or Kingston menu?
Well, in Jamaica, even though jerk chicken, oxtail are very popular here, also in Jamaica, for me, curry goat.
Curry goat?
Curry goat, is again that African roots for us. Goat is a celebratory meat. Good or bad. It could be funerals, it could be a wedding, it could be a birth. That
for the occasion.
For the occasion.
Yeah.
And so, when I eat a good curry goat, it takes me right back to the island.
So would you say if somebody only had one dish to get, like I'm in town for a day, I came to Calabash, what you point me to?
Well, our number, I would say, 2 is the oxtail and jerk chicken. Those are the 2 things that people go for. We sell more of those than anything else. People come from far and wide for those 2 things.
Yeah. I'm sure you can't miss. I want to know what he was going to say. I'm sure everything, man. I've had Kingston. I haven't had here yet.
Okay.
Yeah. Looking forward to it.
Yeah.
We are coming to a close.
Yeah.
I do want to just offer space. Is there anything you feel like you wanted to, make sure people are aware of, or make sure people know, or just, any energy you want to leave us with?
Well, the biggest thing is the question you asked me about around, how people may be feeling and how you can have control. Because that's the main thing for everybody's life. You get up in the morning and you are thinking about, how my day is going to be today. And the more you feel like you have control over how your day is going to go, then the more you feel relaxed. And so I will just want to keep lifting it up around the mindset of acting local. What can you do in your community and in your space and people that to, contribute? And you acknowledge what are they bringing to you in terms of you having the little, success and gratitude, right? Little bits at a time.
Yeah.
Because I'm in this restaurant industry and it's always stressful.
Yeah.
So I have to always figure out ways to talk to myself at night, in the morning when I get up, to just quiet all that stress noise and,
meditate or?
I meditate, but I have people who reach out to me all the time and I feel like very blessed. Right now, my biggest thing is how do we stay in control of our lives, have joy, and everybody's talking about stress. And yes, there is stress, but we can take, some responsibility around how do we show up for each other and our community. And that is showing up in a way that what do we give as we get up in the morning? What am I going to give to my community today? And also acknowledge what are you getting back? And sometimes, like a phone call, a text message that I get from somebody to say, like, I hope you have a good day. Those things are, helps me, to know that somebody else is thinking about me and want me to have a good day.
Yeah.
And that carries me through. So gratitude, Yeah.
It's those little community building efforts
exactly.
go a long way, 100%.
Yes.
And you said something I think kind of encapsulates it all for me is, it's easy to think about the stress and the chaos, especially when you see the big picture.
Yes.
But, just keying in, like you said, approaching the elephant one bite at a time.
One bite at a time, yes.
Take your days one day at a time, one moment at a time even, you know, be present with one another.
Yes.
And continue to spread joy and positivity.
Definitely, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Chef. I just want to tell you, you know, I can't tell you enough. I know as an entrepreneur, you see the phone calls he's getting, man. We're going to let him get back to doing what he does best. But once again, thank you so much for making time.
Yeah, definitely.
Chef Nigel, everybody.
Thank you. Appreciate you.